Listen, dear friend. Close your eyes and let me take you on a journey through time, through the labyrinth of the human heart, to a place where wisdom grows like wildflowers in an ancient garden. This is not a story bound by dates or kingdoms, not a tale measured in years or achievements, but something far more precious, a whisper that has traveled through centuries, carried on the breath of those who understood that happiness is not a destination, but a way of walking through the world.
There was once a man who planted a garden. Not just any garden, but a sanctuary where souls could find rest, where the fevered mind could cool in the shade of simple truths. His name was Epicurus, though names are just sounds we give to the wind, and what matters more is the seed he planted in the fertile ground of human consciousness, a seed that still grows today, reaching toward you, toward anyone who has ever felt lost in the wilderness of modern existence.
Picture, if you will, ancient Greece, not as marble statues and grand temples, but as dust and olive groves, as the salt smell of the sea mixing with the sweat of honest labor. Picture a world where war was never far away, where plague could sweep through cities like a hungry beast, where the gods seemed capricious and distant, and where ordinary people woke each morning to the same questions that wake you. How shall I live? What does it mean to be happy? Why does my heart carry such heaviness?
Into this world walked a young man whose soul was tender as new grass, whose mind was sharp as the morning light cutting through shadows. He looked around at his fellow humans, merchants anxious about their trades, soldiers afraid of death, lovers torn by jealousy, parents worried for their children, and he saw something that broke his heart open like a ripe fruit. He saw that everyone was searching, everyone was hungry, but they were all looking in the wrong places for nourishment.
The merchants believed happiness lived in their counting houses, stacked like coins in neat piles. The powerful believed it waited at the end of conquest, like a prize to be seized. The religious believed it required elaborate rituals, as if joy were a foreign language that demanded perfect pronunciation. But this young seeker, this Epicurus, looked deeper, past the surface ripples of desire down to the still waters where truth dwells, and he understood something revolutionary. Happiness was not something to be achieved, but something to be uncovered, like a spring of fresh water that had always been there, waiting beneath the rocky ground of human complication.
And so he created his garden. Not the Garden of Eden from ancient stories, but something more radical. A place where paradise was not a distant promise, but a present possibility. Here, in this simple space, men and women, slaves and free citizens, young and old, gathered not to worship distant gods, but to discover the divinity that lived within the ordinary moments of existence. They shared meals that were modest but savory, conversations that meandered like gentle streams, silences that held more wisdom than any sermon.
Can you feel it, dear listener? Can you sense the profound rebellion in such simplicity? In a world obsessed with more power, more possessions, more pleasure in its grossest forms, here was a man teaching that true wealth lay in wanting less, that genuine pleasure was found not in the frenzy of endless desire, but in the sweet satisfaction of enough.
Imagine sitting in that garden as the sun sets over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The day's work is done, simple work, honest work, and you sit with friends whose faces have become as familiar as your own reflection. Someone shares bread that tastes like sunshine and earth. Someone else speaks softly of a book they've been reading, or a dream that visited them in the night. There is nowhere else you need to be. nothing else you need to accomplish. This moment, exactly as it is, contains everything you have been searching for. This was Epicurus's first great insight, whispered now across the centuries to your restless heart. Pleasure is not what you think it is. In our modern world, pleasure has been painted in neon colors, sold to us in packages promising instant gratification. We are told that pleasure means the rush of adrenaline, the intoxication of substances, the fever of acquisition, the conquest of others. We chase these things like moths drawn to flames, only to find ourselves burned, exhausted, more empty than before. But the sage of the garden understood that this fevered seeking is not pleasure, but its opposite. It is pain wearing pleasure's mask. True pleasure, he whispered, is the absence of pain, not the dramatic absence that comes from the relief of great suffering, but the gentle absence that lives in a life aligned with itself, in a soul that has found its natural rhythm. Think of the pleasure of breathing when you are not thinking about it, the pleasure of a body that moves without ache, the pleasure of a mind free from the constant chatter of anxiety. Think of the pleasure of friendship that asks nothing but presence, of work that feeds the soul as well as the body, of sleep that comes like a faithful friend at the end of each day. This is what he meant, not the absence of all feeling, but the presence of contentment, like a warm hearth on a cold night, steady and sustaining. In the garden, they called this ataraxia, a word that tastes like peace when you speak it slowly. It means unshakable calmness, the kind of tranquility that doesn't depend on external circumstances but wells up from a deep understanding of what truly matters. Picture a tree that remains rooted and strong whether the wind blows gently or fiercely, that gives the same steady shade whether the sun is mild or scorching. This is the soul that has found ataraxia. But how, you might ask, as you sit in your own modern garden, perhaps a quiet corner of your home, perhaps a bench in a park, perhaps simply the space you create when you close your eyes and turn inward. How do we cultivate such steadiness in a world that seems designed to shake us loose from any peace we might find? Epicurus would lean forward, his eyes kind but knowing, and he would tell you first about the fears that live like thieves in the human heart, stealing away our capacity for joy. He would speak of the 4 great fears that keep us from inhabiting our own lives fully: the fear of the gods, the fear of death, the fear that happiness is impossible, and the fear that pain is unbearable. In his time, people trembled before gods, who seemed to watch from their mountain thrones, ready to punish any misstep with lightning bolts and plagues. Today, we might not fear Zeus or Athena, but we have created our own pantheon of anxieties. We fear the judgment of strangers on social media, the disapproval of authority figures, the possibility that we are not measuring up to some cosmic standard of success or worthiness. We live as if we are always being watched, always being graded, always in danger of failing some test we never fully understood. But listen to what the wise man of the garden whispered: if there are gods, if there is some divine presence in the universe, why would it be petty and cruel? Why would infinite wisdom be bothered by your small mistakes, your human fumbling toward understanding? The divine, if it exists, must be perfect in its contentment, lacking nothing, needing nothing from you, certainly not your fear. You are free to live your life with dignity and kindness without constantly looking over your shoulder for approval or punishment. And death. death, the shadow that falls across every human joy, the thought that can turn the sweetest moment bitter with the reminder that nothing lasts. How many of your sleepless nights have been stolen by death's cold whisper? How many present moments have you missed because your mind was wandering in the graveyard of the future?
Here, Epicurus offered perhaps his most radical comfort. Death is nothing to us. Not because it doesn't happen, not because we should deny its reality, but because it exists only in our imagination of the future, not in our actual experience. You have never experienced being dead, only the fear of it. And that fear is like being afraid of a dreamless sleep. It makes no sense, because there will be no you there to suffer.
What you can experience is life, this breath, this heartbeat, this moment of consciousness that is reading these words right now. Death is the absence of experience, but you are experience itself. Where you are, death is not. Where death is, you are not. Why spend your precious aliveness mourning your future absence?
This is not about being cavalier with life. Quite the opposite. When you truly understand that your time here is finite and precious, you stop wasting it on trivial pursuits and fearful imaginings. You start paying attention to the texture of a friend's laughter, the way light moves across water, the satisfaction of work well done. You start living as if your life mattered, because it does, right now, in ways that death cannot touch.
The philosopher of the garden would walk among his friends in the evening, when the air grew cool and the first stars appeared, and he would remind them gently that they were already wealthy beyond measure, not in gold or lands, but in the capacity for experience itself, in the miracle of consciousness that allowed them to taste wine and feel friendship and contemplate the mystery of existence. This wealth could not be stolen by thieves or lost in market crashes or diminished by sharing. In fact, the more they shared it, the richer everyone became. But what about pain? The unavoidable suffering that comes with having a body, a heart, a mind? What about the grief that follows love, the disappointment that shadows hope, the simple ache of being human in a world that doesn't always bend to our wishes? Here, the garden sage became most practical. Pain, he taught, comes in two forms: the necessary and the unnecessary. Necessary pain is like hunger when you haven't eaten, thirst when you need water, grief when you lose someone dear. This pain is a teacher, a signal, a natural part of the human experience. It passes through you like weather through sky, intense but temporary, leaving you changed but not destroyed.
Unnecessary pain is different. It's the story you tell yourself about the necessary pain, the elaborate drama you construct around simple experiences. It's the hunger that becomes a story about your unworthiness, the thirst that becomes a story about scarcity, the grief that becomes a story about cosmic unfairness. Necessary pain is clean and sharp and finite. Unnecessary pain is muddy and chronic and endless.
In the garden, they learned to tend to necessary pain with the same care they gave to their plants, with attention, with acceptance, with patience for the natural cycles of growth and dormancy. They learned to let unnecessary pain fall away like dead leaves, composting into wisdom, but no longer consuming their energy. Picture yourself learning this art, dear friend. Picture the next time you feel the sharp edge of disappointment or the dull ache of loneliness, and instead of immediately constructing a story about what it means about you or your life or your future, you simply let it be what it is, a feeling moving through you like wind through trees. You don't have to like it, but you don't have to make it your permanent address either.
As the seasons turned in the garden, as young visitors became regular students, and regular students became teachers themselves, a deeper understanding began to bloom. Happiness, they discovered, was not a feeling to be captured, but a way of being to be cultivated. It was not about eliminating all discomfort, but about developing the wisdom to distinguish between suffering that served growth and suffering that served nothing but habit.
And friendship. Oh, the gardens that bloomed within the garden when people learned to relate to each other, not as competitors for scarce resources, but as fellow travelers sharing the brief adventure of being human. In your own life, surrounded by the digital noise of social media, the competitive edge of modern work, the isolation that seems to follow technological connection like a shadow, you might feel a deep hunger for the kind of friendship Epicurus celebrated.
These were not relationships built on utility or entertainment or even shared interests, though all of these might be present. These were bonds forged in the deeper recognition that each person carried within them the same spark of consciousness, the same capacity for joy and suffering, the same essential mystery of what it means to be aware of being alive.
In the garden, they practiced seeing each other clearly, not through the lens of what they could provide or achieve, but through the simple appreciation of shared existence. They learned to listen not just for information, but for the subtle music of another soul expressing itself. They discovered that loneliness is not cured by being around people, but by being truly present with them, and that true presence is a skill that can be learned like any other.
You can feel this even now, can't you? The way your heart opens slightly when you imagine being seen and accepted exactly as you are, when you imagine offering that same unconditional presence to another? This is the antidote to the epidemic of loneliness that plagues our modern world. Not more connections, but deeper ones. Not more networks, but more genuine networks of care.
The merchant who visited the garden worried constantly about his business, about competition from other traders, about the fluctuations of markets he couldn't control. He would arrive exhausted from sleepless nights spent calculating profits and losses, his mind churning like a mill wheel that never stops grinding. Epicurus would sit with him in the shade of an olive tree and ask simple questions. What do you actually need to be happy? How much is enough? What would change in your life if you had twice as much money? Half as much? Slowly, the merchant began to see that his anxiety was not about money, but about security, and that security was not about accumulating wealth, but about understanding what was truly necessary for a good life. He learned to distinguish between natural desires for food, shelter, companionship, and empty desires for fame, power, immortality. The natural desires could be satisfied. The empty ones were like trying to fill a bucket with no bottom.
This wisdom speaks directly to your modern heart, doesn't it? In a culture that profits from your dissatisfaction, that constantly whispers that you need more, better, different, faster, you can almost hear the gentle voice of the garden reminding you that contentment is not the opposite of ambition, but its wisest form. When you know what enough feels like, you can pursue goals from a place of joy rather than desperate need. When you understand the difference between natural and empty desires, you can choose where to invest your precious energy.
The young woman who came to the garden was brilliant, but tormented by perfectionism, by the fear that any mistake would reveal her as fundamentally flawed. She pushed herself mercilessly, achieving success that felt hollow because it was built on the foundation of self-rejection. In the garden, she encountered something revolutionary,
the possibility of excellence without violence, of growth without self-punishment. She learned that wisdom was not about knowing everything, but about knowing what was important to know. She discovered that mistakes were not evidence of unworthiness, but proof of engagement with life. Most profoundly, she began to understand that the voice in her head that criticized her constantly was not the voice of truth, but simply the voice of fear, trying to protect her by keeping her small.
Can you feel how this applies to your own inner landscape? How many times have you achieved something you thought you wanted, only to find that the satisfaction lasted barely longer than morning mist? How many times have you driven yourself toward goals that seemed important until you reached them and realized they were just markers on someone else's map of success?
The garden offered a different metric for a life well lived. Instead of asking, "What have I accomplished?" they asked, "How have I grown in wisdom? How have I loved? How have I contributed to the flourishing of my community? How have I honored the gift of consciousness that allows me to ask these questions?"
These were not questions with final answers, but inquiries that deepened with time, like roots growing stronger in rich soil. Each day offered new opportunities to practice these investigations, not as self-improvement projects, but as expressions of gratitude for the privilege of being aware. As word of the garden spread, visitors came from distant lands, carrying with them the anxieties and aspirations of their cultures. Some came seeking healing from trauma, others running from responsibilities they couldn't face, still others driven by intellectual curiosity about the philosophy being practiced there. What they found was not a retreat from the world, but a laboratory for engaging with it more skillfully.
The soldier who had seen too much violence learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act with love despite fear. The mother, overwhelmed by the demands of caring for others, discovered that self-care was not selfish, but essential, that she could only give from a full cup. The young artist, paralyzed by the vast possibilities of creation, found that limitations could be liberating, that choosing one path wholeheartedly was more fulfilling than keeping all options open indefinitely.
In our current moment, when information overwhelms wisdom, when options proliferate faster than our ability to choose among them, when the pace of change seems to accelerate beyond human capacity to adapt, these insights from the garden feel like cool water in a desert. The anxiety that characterizes modern life, the constant feeling that you're falling behind, missing out, not doing enough, dissolves when you remember that you are exactly where you need to be to learn what life is trying to teach you right now. This doesn't mean passive acceptance of harmful circumstances or abandoning all aspirations. It means recognizing that contentment is not a destination, but a way of traveling. That peace is not the absence of challenge, but the presence of inner stability while facing whatever comes.
In the garden, they practiced what we might now call mindfulness, though they didn't use that word. They called it simply paying attention to the food they ate, the conversations they shared, the thoughts that moved through their minds like clouds across sky. They noticed without judgment, observed without immediately trying to fix or change or improve. This practice of kind attention became the foundation for all other wisdom.
You can taste this even now as you listen to these words. Notice the breath moving in and out of your body without your conscious control, the miracle of your heart beating steadily, the countless processes of life happening within you without any effort on your part. This is where peace lives, not in some future achievement, but in the recognition of the abundance that already surrounds and fills you.
The philosopher would often speak of pleasure as a garden that could be cultivated, not a wild thing to be hunted. In a garden, you prepare the soil, plant seeds, tend them with patience, and trust the natural process of growth. You don't force flowers to bloom before their time, but you also don't neglect the conditions that allow blooming to happen naturally.
Similarly, a life of genuine pleasure requires preparation, developing the capacity to receive beauty, cultivating relationships that nourish rather than drain, creating work that feels meaningful, maintaining a body that can serve as a trustworthy vehicle for experience. This takes time and attention, but unlike the endless chase after external pleasures, this investment pays dividends that compound over years.
In your own life, you've probably experienced both kinds of pleasure: the quick hit that leaves you wanting more, and the deep satisfaction that seems to generate its own contentment. The difference is not in the pleasure itself, but in your relationship to it. External pleasures are like borrowed happiness. Internal pleasures are like wealth you've earned through wise living.
The garden taught that the highest pleasure was the pleasure of consciousness itself, the simple joy of being aware that you are aware, of knowing that you know, of loving that you can love. This might sound abstract until you've experienced it directly. It's the moment when you realize that you're not just surviving your life, but actually living it. Not just going through the motions, but engaging with the full mystery of existence. Picture the evening conversations in the garden, when the work of the day was done and friends gathered to share what they had learned, what they had noticed, what questions had arisen in their minds. These were not debates to be won, but explorations to be savored, not problems to be solved, but mysteries to be appreciated. The quality of attention they brought to these exchanges was itself a form of worship. Worship of the human capacity for wonder, for connection, for growth. This is what your soul hungers for when you feel isolated in the digital crowd, when conversation feels scripted and superficial, when you long for someone to see you clearly and reflect back your deeper nature. The garden reminds us that such communion is possible, but it requires the courage to be authentic and the patience to create the conditions where authenticity can flourish. As the years passed and Epicurus grew older, his body began to fail him in various ways. He experienced physical pain, the diminishment of certain pleasures, the gradual awareness that his time in the garden was not infinite. But those who lived with him noticed something remarkable. His equanimity deepened rather than disappeared. His acceptance of limitation became a teaching in itself.
He had lived long enough to see that happiness was not a permanent state, but a skillful response to the constantly changing conditions of existence. He had learned to dance with impermanence rather than resist it, to find beauty in endings as well as beginnings, to appreciate the preciousness of moments precisely because they would not last forever.
This mature wisdom speaks directly to anyone who has lived long enough to experience real loss, to face their own mortality, to understand that the life they thought they were building is actually the life they're already living. There comes a moment in every human journey when you realize that you've been waiting for life to begin, and suddenly you understand that it began long ago and has been happening all around you while you were making other plans. The modern epidemic of burnout, the sense that you're running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up, the feeling that you're always behind on some important task you can't quite identify, All of this dissolves when you remember what the garden taught about the relationship between effort and ease. True productivity comes not from forcing, but from aligning. Not from grinding, but from flowing with your natural rhythms and capacities.
In the garden, they worked because work was one of the pleasures of embodied existence, the satisfaction of caring for plants, preparing food, maintaining the space that sheltered their community. But they worked within the natural limits of energy and attention, allowing for rest, for conversation, for solitude, for the seemingly unproductive activities that actually nourish the soul. You live in a culture that has forgotten this wisdom, that treats rest as laziness and contemplation as waste of time. But your body knows better. Your soul knows better. And when you listen deeply, you can hear the garden's gentle voice, reminding you that you are a human being, not a human doing, that your worth is not measured by your output, but by your capacity to love and be loved, to experience and appreciate the mystery of consciousness itself.
The digital age has given you unprecedented access to information, to people, to opportunities, but it has also created unprecedented demands on your attention. Every notification is a small demand for immediate response, every social media feed a comparison trap, every news cycle a reason for anxiety about things beyond your control. The constant connectivity that was supposed to bring you closer to others often leaves you feeling more isolated than ever. But the garden's wisdom about friendship offers a path through this maze. True connection doesn't require constant communication, but rather the quality of presence you bring to your interactions. It's not about having hundreds of contacts, but about cultivating a few relationships where you can be fully yourself. It's not about staying informed about everyone's daily activities, but about being available for the deeper currents of joy and sorrow that move through the people you care about.
You can practice this even now in your digital interactions. Instead of mindlessly scrolling, you can choose to engage with intention. Instead of broadcasting your own anxieties, you can offer genuine presence to others. Instead of using technology to escape from life, you can use it to deepen your engagement with the people and pursuits that truly matter to you.
The garden understood that attention is the most precious gift you have to offer. More valuable than money, more powerful than words, more lasting than any material present. When you give someone your full attention, you're giving them the gift of feeling truly seen and heard. When you receive someone's attention, you're receiving confirmation that your existence matters. In a world that profits from distraction, that sells your attention to the highest bidder, that constantly fragments your focus with urgent but unimportant demands, choosing where to place your attention becomes a radical act of self-determination. The garden reminds you that you always have this choice, even when it doesn't feel like it, even when the momentum of habit or expectation seems overwhelming.
The young man who came to the garden struggling with anxiety about the future learned something profound about time. He had been living as if the present moment was just a waiting room for the real life that would begin when he achieved certain goals, found the right relationship, accumulated enough resources to feel secure. But the garden taught him that the future exists only in imagination, that the past exists only in memory, and that life itself exists only now.
This wasn't about abandoning all planning or goal setting, but about holding future aspirations lightly, as possibilities rather than requirements for happiness. It was about learning to invest in the present moment with the same energy he had been putting into worrying about tomorrow.
It was about discovering that contentment is available right now, not as a consolation prize, but as the deepest treasure existence has to offer.
Your modern life pulls you constantly into the future. Deadlines to meet, goals to achieve, problems to solve, improvements to make. The anxiety that accompanies this future focus is not just psychological, but spiritual. When you live in the future, you miss the only life you actually have, which is happening right now, in this breath, in this heartbeat, in this moment of awareness reading these words.
The garden offers you a different relationship with time, one that honors planning while rooting you in presence, that respects ambition while celebrating satisfaction, that acknowledges the necessity of forward movement while finding stability in the eternal now. As the sun set each day in the garden, as friends gathered for their evening meal, as the stars emerged in the darkening sky, there was often a quality of completion that had nothing to do with finishing tasks and everything to do with having lived the day fully. They had worked and rested, loved and learned, given and received, not perfectly, but wholeheartedly. They had practiced the art of being human with consciousness and intention. This is available to you as well, dear friend. Not as an escape from the complexity of modern life, but as a way of engaging with that complexity from a place of inner stability. Not as a rejection of your responsibilities, but as a deeper understanding of what responsibility really means, the ability to respond to life from your fullest capacity rather than from your fears.
The philosopher of the garden often spoke of philosophy not as an academic subject, but as a medicine for the soul, a practice that could heal the separation between how you live and how you want to live, between what you think will make you happy and what actually does. This medicine works not through dramatic transformation, but through the gradual alignment of your daily choices with your deepest values.
You don't need to abandon your life and retreat to a garden to receive this medicine. You can begin exactly where you are, with whatever challenges and circumstances currently surround you. You can start by noticing what brings you genuine pleasure versus what you think should bring you pleasure. You can practice distinguishing between necessary and unnecessary suffering. You can experiment with placing your attention on what's working in your life, rather than constantly scanning for what's wrong.
The garden's most radical teaching might be this: you already have everything you need to be happy. Not happy in some distant future when conditions improve, but happy now, in this moment, with this life, as it actually is. This doesn't mean you can't work to improve circumstances or grow as a person, but it means that your happiness doesn't depend on these improvements happening.
This teaching challenges everything your culture tells you about success, about progress, about the purpose of human life. It suggests that the treasure you've been seeking in achievement and acquisition and approval has been buried in your own backyard all along, waiting for you to stop digging in distant lands and start paying attention to the ground beneath your feet.
As night falls on this journey through time and thought, as we prepare to return from the ancient garden to your modern life, carry with you this understanding. The wisdom that bloomed in that simple place so long ago was not bound by time or culture. It speaks directly to your contemporary heart because it addresses the timeless challenges of human existence. How to live well, how to love well, how to die well when the time comes.
The anxiety that keeps you awake at night, the longing that moves through your quiet moments, the sense that life should be more meaningful than it sometimes feels.
All of this is the same material that the garden worked with. Not problems to be solved, but the very substance from which wisdom is made. Not obstacles to happiness, but invitations to go deeper, to understand more clearly what happiness actually means. You are not broken and needing to be fixed. You are not lacking something essential that others possess. You are not behind schedule on some cosmic timeline of achievement. You are exactly where you need to be, to learn what this moment is offering to teach you, to love what this moment is offering to be loved, to appreciate what this moment is offering for your appreciation.
The garden grows wherever someone chooses presence over distraction, connection over isolation, gratitude over complaint, wisdom over mere information. It grows in the corner of a modern apartment where someone sits quietly in the morning, watching light move across a wall. It grows in the conversation between friends who listen as deeply as they speak. It grows in the workplace where someone chooses kindness over competition, collaboration over conquest. It grows in the space between heartbeats, in the pause between thoughts, in the eternal now that is always available, but so easily overlooked in the rush towards somewhere else. It grows wherever someone remembers that they are not just a body moving through space or a mind solving problems, but a consciousness experiencing the miracle of being aware that it is aware.
The invitation is always present, dear friend, not to become someone else or to create a different life, but to inhabit this life, your actual life, with the full presence and appreciation it deserves. The garden waits for you not in some distant place, but in the next choice you make, the next breath you take, the next moment you decide to pay attention to what is rather than worrying about what isn't.
This is the gift that echoes across centuries, from the olive groves of ancient Greece to wherever you sit right now. Happiness is not something to be pursued, but something to be practiced. Not a destination to reach, but a way of traveling. Not a prize to be won, but a recognition of what has always been available for your discovery. Listen now to the silence that follows these words, to the space that holds all stories, all seeking, all finding. In that silence, the garden blooms eternal, offering its ancient peace to your modern heart, reminding you that you are already home in the only life you will ever have, already wealthy beyond measure in the currency that truly matters, the precious gift of conscious existence itself.
The story ends where it began, with you, here, now, aware of being aware, capable of choosing where to place your attention, free to discover what the sages have always known, that paradise is not a place you go, but a recognition of where you have always been, not a future reward, but a present possibility, available in this moment and every moment, as close as your next breath, as simple as your willingness to receive it.